everybody. Oh my gosh, look at all these incredible people. Can you put in the chat where you're coming from? I know I can see like a bunch of gateless people, and I get to meet other people who are here from Amber's community, which I cannot wait. I'm so looking forward to meeting you guys and us being all in a room together. We have a lot of crossover, Amber and I. So it's always really great to be able to meet each other's people. It's funny, Terry Trespigio told me about Amber. I can't remember how you guys met, Amber, but she was the one who introduced me to your work. And then I was running a retreat in Connecticut last fall, and Natalie Schaefer was there, and she has worked with you and just said, I mean, she's just publishing like all the time and now helping people one-on-one. And she's doing the academy this year. She's a gateless trained teacher, but she was the other person who introduced me to you, and then it kind of snowballed. So it's really cool that, our worlds cross over quite a bit.
Yeah, it is always great to be here. And yeah, I met Terry just by mentioning I just recommended her book in my newsletter. And she was like, "Oh, that's so
Yeah,
nice of you. Who are you?"
you, and now I love you. Yeah, I know. Well, it's so important, Amber, the work you're doing, because all the time we're hearing from agents, and I'll introduce myself to your people in case they don't know me, but agents and publishers, the book can be really fantastic, and then if it doesn't have, if the author isn't in the conversation through media outlets, sometimes they can get rejected. So it's like it is sort of the next step. It's like you want to make sure that you're in the conversation with media as much as possible as you're moving the work to publication in book form. So it's just a really nice marriage, and I'm just so like glad that Terry found you and that you've been so kind and generous to our authors. So for you guys who don't necessarily know me, I'm Suzanne Kingsbury, and I'm the founder of a literary arts organization called Gateless Writing. And Gateless was really built so that writers who wanted to write in book form could get their work out there. And they also write in other ways, obviously, but a lot of our writers are working towards book publication, so manuscript, um, organizing manuscripts and getting it to mostly to New York. So we work kind of in a big way with the big four and agents. And these are sometimes people who have published a lot before. I've worked with authors who are on like their eighth books, and then the brand new author who has the idea and really wants to get the book into the hands of people that can move it to the world in a global way. So we often, are in a playing field that's very level and gateless, right? So there are people that you'll meet that are winning literary awards and getting film options, sitting right next to people who are just out of the gate with the work and really excited to move their body of work and their voice into the world. So today, we're here with Amber Petty because she's one of the core faculty for the Gateless Writing Academy, which closes its doors for application. The final application deadline is December 15th. And so we're kind of gearing up right now to allow everybody who's applying to the Gateless Academy, a book building program, to meet Amber, to ask her questions, because they'll be working with her ultimately in the last month of the program, in her membership program. So that's kind of where this um, conjunction is at between me and Amber. And Amber, did you want to say anything, love? I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm just so excited. Yeah, Suzanne is brilliant with getting people to write beautifully in ways that they probably don't even expect, which is always a beautiful surprise, and knows everything about book publishing, things like that. That is not something I know about. But where I come in is the stuff on the other side. So, one, when you're working on a book, it's such a massive project that sometimes it's nice to be able to put out shorter pieces that get a little bit of money, a little bit of attention, and give you even like a little, not a break from your book, but just if you're in any of those stages where inevitably we all have those, actually, I'm horrible. This is the worst thing in the world kind of stage of writing, which Suzanne probably helps you not get there, but if you're anything like me, that stage happens somewhere along the line. It can be good to break it up and also be promoting yourself. So I talk about both pitching stuff where you can pitch stuff that's related to what you're writing about. So it's not, doesn't feel like another huge to do on your list to add. So you can pitch stuff like that, or you could pitch stuff that is off topic, something different, but it's still just showing you are a writer out there. It adds a publication to your platform, which never hurts anything. And in my membership, also, I talk about ways you can promote yourself in your own way. So, in your own newsletter, your own podcast, whatever, so that you have both the getting yourself in the media and working with editors in that side, and also growing your own thing, because that can be just as powerful and helpful too, and gives you that sense of control, especially when you're in the midst of querying to agents and waiting for publishers. These are the things you get to do that give you that sense of, I'm not waiting for anybody. I am actively pitching this person. I am actively talking to my audience and growing it. And those things don't hurt any book ever. Having an audience, no agent or publisher is ever going to be mad that you have an audience. And in fact, you will be the beautiful writer who's like, oh, yeah, growing my platform, I've been doing that. I mean, I can't speak to whether that gets you a deal or not, certainly, but they're at least going to be excited to hear it, because usually that's where authors go. Oh, platform? Great. I never want to do that. How about I die instead? So you'll be putting yourself ahead of the game in a whole bunch of ways.
Yeah, and Amber also has a little treat for you guys today. Do you want to talk about what that is, love?
Yeah. So, so this is just a resource you all can use. This is about 250 publications that pay for your writing. I'm going to put that in the chat. It's just a Google Docs. If you're seeing that in the chat, that's what it is. You can keep that and bookmark it, because what it is 250 places that pay for your writing. So these are publications that actively look for writing of different kinds. They're different, they're big name places, smaller places. They all pay, which is nice. Paying places also tend to get back to you faster than literary magazines and things like that that don't pay. Not that those are bad, but who doesn't want money? I don't know too many writers. I'm getting paid too much. So it's a fun thing to also give you that little extra incentive of, I'm getting paid to do my own PR. So that's there as a starting point. Of course, there are more places out there by all means, but it's just something to give you a place to start, because that where to pitch question can be very overwhelming. So I recommend using that as a, okay, let me just check out the topic I'm interested in today, check out one of these places, a couple of these places, and just go from there. So it's that kind of little building block thing you can hang on to no matter what you do. Feel free to bookmark it and come back to it when you're putting your work out there.
Yeah, that's so generous. Thank you, Amber. And I think it's the biggest thing really is like where do I go with my work and how do I do it? You know, that's sort of like the overwhelm when people get in this stuck place, fight, fight, or flee, freeze, that they're kind of like, I know I want to do this and I know I quote unquote should, but like how? So it's just so great to have you out there. And I wanted to ask you, Amber, because I actually don't know how you went from like showgirl to like this media guru. So I was wondering if you would, and I always think the Genesis story is so interesting because essentially, like, when you have this very cool Genesis story, then you're turning around and helping other people with their Genesis story of the same thing. So I'm just curious, like, how did it happen?
Um, I should just start calling myself a showgirl, because why not? I'll have a real, like that improv show. that doesn't look like a showgirl. Anyway, so I wanted to be an actor my whole life, like since I was 6 or since I was 3, where I was like, am I going to be an actor or a singer? I was really torn about it, as 3-year-olds are. So that's what I wanted to do my whole life. And that's what I did. I did that in New York, and I did a lot of improv comedy and off Broadway shows and a national tour and stuff like that. And still made no money. And what was really frustrating eventually is even though I did have some very cool things, that I got to do, it still felt like there was no momentum. It was every step was hard and felt like whenever I got that next thing that was supposed to help you, it didn't. If I was like just treated like nobody always. And so then I moved to LA with my husband and started doing freelance writing just because, and again, this does sound odd, but it just tells you how bad acting is I started freelance writing for the money of it, which is something no intelligent human should say. But I knew somebody that did some freelance. I knew a few people that had done it. So just as like a side job, that's what I wanted to do because I was getting tired of, because I would teach classes, bartend at a theater, do this, do that. And I was like, I'm just trying to do one side job. And then doing that, where I literally wrote for Snooki's blog from the Jersey Shore. That was one of my first jobs. Even that stuff that was not great writing or anything life changing was still so much more fun than having to wait constantly for somebody to tell you it's okay. So I went into freelance writing full time, and then I learned about copywriting and got a couple copywriting jobs. And during the pandemic, I saw that all my performer friends were out of their side jobs and their real jobs, and so I started teaching about writing, and that uh, really took off and became this unexpected thing where I got to be in front of people and help people and use little bits of all my weird life kind of all put together and to see people get to feel that experience of that creative satisfaction. And so, yeah, so that's how it all came to be.
And what was your first beat? Like when you were doing freelance at the very beginning, what were you writing about or pitching?
I was mostly writing about just entertainment stuff. That's where I started. I wrote a spec article about 6 of the worst video game movies of all time. So I started just with kind of entertainment and then pitched. I would kind of just pitch wherever I saw an opportunity or try different things. And so then I got into health writing a lot more and wrote about that and did copywriting for that, did cosmetics copywriting. So yeah, it started from bad video game movies.
And and how did you know who to pitch? Like, did you just look on the masthead and like search their email, or how did you?
So when I very first started, I was just applying to like gigs on Craigslist mostly, to be honest, and doing it that way and found stuff. And then eventually I found out you could pitch editors directly. So that's when I started doing that. So sometimes I would find um, editors tweeting out calls for pitches. So I started with that. And they still do this not as much on Twitter, but on Blue Sky and stuff like that, where they will ask for something directly. And then I started to, find people individually when I wanted to branch out from that, find people individually on the masthead. Then you find their business email address and pitch directly there. And now I would say, like, you do not need to go through that path I did. I'm not not telling anybody to start on Craigslist gigs. Anybody can just pitch those editors directly. Like, I just didn't know that was possible, but it is. And even if a place doesn't have submission information on their website, almost every single place, any major newspaper and magazine especially, they are open to freelancers and they need freelancers. Nobody has the staff they need. Like, and that's not going to be changing in the near future. So getting ideas from freelancers isn't a bother. It's not, who are you, why are you reaching out to me? It's, I'm an editor, I need a bunch of story ideas and I need people to write them. So you are sending, hey, you need an idea, I have an idea, here it is. and it's either a fit for them or it's not. But that kind of judgment you might imagine of like, oh my God, Wendy thought she could pitch me, like that doesn't happen. That never
Mhm.
happens. They're just, oh, this story, great. I like it. Let's commission it. Or, yeah, that doesn't fit what we need. Happy to hear from you again.
Yeah, yeah. And how did you deal at the beginning, Amber, with sort of your voice and rejection? I feel like that's a big part of this is kind of getting up the gumption almost to be like, okay, I have something to say, and we'll talk about that too, but I have something to say and I'm like a little afraid to get it out there, or I got it out there and then I got rejected 17
Yeah.
times. Like what was your advice for all of that?
Yeah. So for me, what was lucky was that all of my like obsessive passion was around acting. And so I had those feelings where it was really scary to reach out for things because every rejection felt like a rejection of me and my whole life's work. And because the rejection, and then because writing, I was like, I sometimes now I don't always have this, but sometimes I had to like take it or leave it. I don't get to write about canned wines. I'm not going to lose sleep at night. Like, take it or leave it. And so, because I got to experience that feeling a little bit more, it helped me realize that, like, that is really all that's at stake with any individual pitch. And that's why I think pitching, whether you're doing it regularly or not, is such a just good thing to have in your toolbox. Because unlike a book where, yeah, of course, you've worked so hard on it, there's like only so many chances, whatever. With a pitch, like there's always a million more chances and a different angle you could take. And the same exact, I've had students who the exact same publication said no to a pitch and said yes to the exact same pitch 2 years later because there was a different editor and it was very successful. So, with rejection of these pitches, the thing to remember is it's never a rejection of you as a writer. They don't even know what you're like as a writer. It's only a rejection of this, it isn't a fit for this publication right now. That's it. And the more you treat each pitch as just, a tiny seed you're planting in a garden, the easier it is because with so much talk of going viral and things like this, there can be that pressure of, well, what's the right story to pitch? What's the thing that's going to make a difference? What's the best example of my work I could put out there? And that really doesn't exist. That thing might get picked up and go nowhere. And you could do a 10-second pitch about, candies at Halloween, like one of my students did. And that ended up getting her into BuzzFeed and then eventually led her to get all these jobs. And it was like a nothing pitch that she just put out there. So the more you treat a pitch as, hey, of course I care about this and I want to write about it, but I'm going to have a million chances to write about it. So let's just see where it lands. That tends to be the most helpful way to get published and the most helpful way to deal with the rejection as it happens.
Yeah, that's such great advice. And when you pitch an editor, Levy, or when you did before, what do you put in the subject line usually?
Yeah, so you want to put the word pitch in the subject line. That just keeps it easier for editors to navigate. And then you want to basically put a headline of your story. So, what would that headline be? Now, this does a couple of things. It shows you know what your story actually is because that is the biggest thing people see. And it can be challenging too when you're coming from a book, is that you have so much stuff you want to cover, you have so much information, and we're taking just a tiny slice of that. We're not a chapter, not like we're taking a little tiny piece. So that shows that you know that kind of main core piece of your story. And then also putting a headline also shows you read that publication. Now, because I think Suzanne's people are much like mine of like, oh, I haven't read it. I haven't read 10 back issues. And that, like, no, it just means you went to their website, you've gone through like 10 headlines in the category you're pitching. So let's say you're going to pitch personal essays at Huffington Post, go to personal, read through 10 headlines, read one of the stories. That's fine. And then craft your headline in the style they use at that publication. And again, that doesn't have to be a huge deal. It means what's the kind of style, because some places have a very Business Insider. It's like a paragraph long. I did this
Wow.
one time, and I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's like, you know, I had this one thing happen, and then my relationship fell apart, and also my house exploded. But then I learned the true meaning of Christmas. Like, they can get really long, and that's fine. Write it in that style. Like Huffington Post will have a style that's different from the Atlantic. Just write it in that style because then that shows, hey, I'm familiar with your style. And two, I understand the crux of this story. And that is, it doesn't have to be a clever or anything title, it just needs to be clear. And it also helps you make sure that your pitch is really clear and specific. So that's what you want to put in the head, pitch, and then your title, your proposed headline, basically.
Okay. And like, how long is the pitch? When you send a pitch in, does it kind of depend on whether it's a listicle or whether it's like a feature? Like, how do you?
Yeah, so a feature might be a little bit longer, but otherwise the pitch format is pretty much the same throughout.
Okay.
So you're going
Okay.
to have it's going to be about 250 to 350 words total. And that's for most things. So if it's a really big feature with a lot of research stuff like that, it can be a little bit longer, but um that's where you want to be for almost everything. So 250 to 350 words. Um, you don't have to do tons of introduction. You can just say, hi, here's a pitch. You can go into it just like that. If you have a real compliment for the paper or you know the editor in some way, put that at the top, but only if it's real. If it's just, I enjoy your work, like just skip it and just
Okay.
go right to the pitch. And the pitch, you want to answer 3 questions, and I'll put these in the chat too. So it's just, what is the angle of your story? And I'll explain what these mean in a second. What is the angle? Um, why do readers care now? And why should you write it? And then give an example or two of what would be in the story. So, what's the angle? That means that specific story. So, this is a story about grief when my mother died. So, that is a huge topic. But if it's something specific, like this is how I dealt with, um, the story is about inheriting my mother's clothes and what it was like to put that back in my closet, that also speaks to the grief of losing a parent in middle age. Like that was a real story one of my students did. So that you can see is a million times more specific. So it's still reaching a topic that many people are interested in, but now we can see, oh, yeah, that's not a story that's going to get pitched a million times. We see already your voice and style to it. If it's not a personal essay, it can also just be even if it is the best canned wines for summer, which is an article I have written, it's best canned wines for summer. It wasn't just wines, it wasn't some good wines, it was about canned wines, and I specifically said why those should be highlighted. And summer, because that's a different type of wine you're looking for. So that's the angle. Why do readers care now? Why would readers want to read it? Why does this matter now? That's the most important question, because that is speaking to what they actually care about most. Why do people want to read this? It's good, the writing is good, is they assume that, right? So like what's going to get people in the door? Like what's going to make them click on it? This is a good place to put any statistics you have. That can sound weird, but if you are writing about long COVID or something like that, that's a good time to put some statistics maybe of this is actually how many people are still dealing with this. Even if you're talking about, uh, something inspired by a TikTok trend, like link to the TikTok and say how many millions of people have followed it. You don't always have to have a statistic here, but thinking of let me show you the audiences there and why they are looking for more. That's what you want to do. And that's a great thing to practice because you're going to be asked to do that in your book stuff down the road anyway. So it's really good practice on thinking of, I know what this delivers, but how do I translate that to so readers understand what they get? Then why should you write it? That's the less least stressful one. If it's a personal essay, you don't even have to answer this really. Um, but it's a time if you were, let's say it is an essay about long COVID. Well, if you are also a nurse or doctor, even if that's not the main thrust of the piece, that just shows, hey, I have additional insight into this that's going to make this different. Um, if you don't have that, it's fine. For personal essays, you're writing it because it's your story. For something like, I wrote about Eurovision performances. I don't have any experience with that that's helpful, but I just said I'd been in the entertainment industry and was a legit huge fan of Eurovision, which is pretty just a little rare for Americans, and it's something I followed all the time. So just establishing, oh, I do at least have some
Mhm.
knowledge in the area. I am excited about it in that case, just that kind of stuff. So it's not about how you need to show off all your writing credentials. It's actually what other stuff in your life maybe makes you a more unique candidate to write about this. Slight caveat, if you have written a book about it, put that in there. Like by all means put that in there too. But it's like you don't have to say you had an MFA or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And so if you've never published before and you're pitching, like I mean, short form, if you've never published before, is that okay? Like, are they going to be like, "Oh my gosh, we don't want you," or you're just putting something else that makes you an expert? Maybe they'll see in the pitch that you're a good writer.
Yeah, so if you have other things, especially if you have a history of, you have a book on it that's out, stuff like that, then sometimes they will, and sometimes regardless, if you have nothing, they don't care. They'll still, they'll still hire you to do it. Ideally, you just want to have some sample of your work you can share. Now, that could be a blog post, that could be a Substack post, it can be a piece you've written yourself and published yourself. So that's where I would say, just to make it easier for an editor to say yes, if you can put something out there, that could be an essay you've worked on and you just publish it on Medium or on your own blog or just somewhere where somebody can look at it publicly through a link easily. And I say that just
Okay.
because there's lots of times editors, they just want to see what your writing looks like. So you don't have to
Yeah.
stress about this being, so perfect. Like, again, my piece was that 6 worst video game movies, but it just showed, oh, okay, I know how these work. You see what your voice is like. Great. That's all like you
Yeah.
needed to see.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. And can you talk just for a second about Medium and Substack? So, um, what's your feeling about those versus really getting them into these specific publications like Washington Post, LA Times? Like, you know, tell me a little bit about that, the forest
Yeah.
of that.
So Medium I call like fancy Tumblr because that's kind of all it is. And Medium most of the time I think is to be real blunt, worthless. I don't think it's a place to build a platform. I don't think it's a good place to get your work seen. I don't think it's good for any of that. But what I think it is good for is one-off pieces. One-off pieces where you're either like, you know what, I just want this out there, or I want to use this as a sample. Then it's easy to send, easy to read, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's good for that. Now, a Substack, I think that is better when you have a reason behind it, meaning having a Substack or having any kind of email list, because Substack is just an email list, it's just on a different platform. Um, I think that is fantastic. Like email lists are super huge. I think most of you saw or you've talked with Laura Belgray and stuff. She's, the expert on that, of course, but like it can be super helpful. Um, Yet, if you're just like, well, somebody said I should have a Substack, so here it is, that's usually a good way to get frustrated and feel like it's a waste of your time. So, if you want to, have a place for writing that doesn't get picked up elsewhere. You could do that. If you have a specific thing you want to do to grow your audience for your writing, and then also sometimes you post extra essays and stuff like that, I think that's super great, you know. But it's not that you have to make a perfect plan and blah blah blah. No, but just go into it with a more of an idea than, oh, somebody told me I should do it, so I will. As long as you have a reason that feels exciting to you, do it. Um, and then I would say pitch stuff first and then publish stuff. If it doesn't get, if something just never goes anywhere, then that is a good time to publish it wherever feels good to you and share it. But try pitching them first. I would
Yeah.
say try
Okay.
first, and then if they don't get anywhere, which is going to happen to everybody, then
Yeah.
yeah, cool, I will put it out somewhere and I'll share it with everybody on social media or wherever. And you know, sometimes stuff
Yeah.
comes out of that. So
So when you already have an email list, Amber, should
mhm.
you like like in MailChimp or something, should you transfer that to Substack and then just kind of use Substack? Is that a good idea or?
that depends on That depends on everybody individually a little bit. So, as quick as I can. So, Substack is not like a magical platform. I think sometimes writers and Substack itself wants to make it sound like it's this beautiful place where writers just write and get paid for their newsletters and everybody's commenting and living in a beautiful happy field of writers. And you know, it's not untrue except that everybody's getting paid part. So it's not going to magically get you a ton of organic subscribers to be on Substack, but it will get some. So if your only thing is email and it's mostly about marketing your writing, if it's easier for you to just, yeah, move your MailChimp, for example, people over to Substack and do a Substack, cool. There is a little bit of a bigger audience there. There are, you know, comments and stuff, people commenting on each other's newsletters, like, does happen. So if that feels easier to you, then do that. I am not on Substack. I use ConvertKit because I have marketing emails I want to send and notifications about classes and all that kind of stuff. So I would say if what you have you already like and it's working, just keep doing it where you're doing it. You can just, and then yeah, if you have a website already and you want a place to kind of hold some of those newsletters that you send out, because that's the difference with Substack is sends out via email and also is saved kind of like a blog. If you want to do that, then you can easily just put up a very basic blog site if you already have a website and just, yep, take your essay you liked, put it on your blog, have a blog there. You don't even need to do that necessarily, but that's a step you could do. Or if you're like, that all sounds like garbage, I just like Substack, yeah, just switch over to Substack. It's not a big deal. Um, do whatever is easiest for you that you will do.
Yeah, and you could probably keep it all in MailChimp in case you want to do the marketing, but then you can have a double sort of, yeah,
Yeah.
in this, yeah.
Yeah, you could totally keep MailChimp just for the marketing emails if you wanted to, and then have Substack just for more newslettery type stuff, like whatever. And I will say if this is all based on future things you think might happen, then don't put that into account, you know, like, but yeah, but then when I'm selling 400 classes, I'll need, when you're selling 400 classes, you'll put up the next system you need. Like, and I say that as a person that does that all the time. I've already planned, well, when I want to write a thriller after my romance book is my audience, I haven't written a book. Okay. So I am as guilty as that of anybody, but
Oh
do
my
what will
God.
be easy and start emailing people now.
So, love, tell us a little bit about time. Like, I think it's one of the things that people feel like, oh my God, I have to work on my book and I have to raise my kids and I have to work full
Yeah.
time and I also have to do this, like getting it out into the world. Like, once you know the pitch formula that you give, it's like it's kind of get so it's almost like a wheel, right? I mean, that was always my experience, but what is your
Mhm.
experience?
Yeah, it does get much easier as you go and less time consuming as you go. And remember, with with pitches and essays and stuff, if they don't get picked up, you can just pitch them somewhere else. And when you do that, you don't have to rewrite everything in the pitch. You're going to just be tweaking it, for the publication. So know that there's a lot of, reuse and recycle kind of stuff, which is nice. And part of it is, um, part of what takes so much time with pitching is the overthinking about all of it and the telling yourself it's not actually going to happen. That's what tends to take the most time, is that you're thinking, well, it's not going to happen anyway, so who am I going to find? And then when you're searching like that, nothing sounds good. And then, so the more, and again, I do that same thing too. The more you can cultivate and just practice, honestly, that, hey, I've already got a book happening. That's cool. This is just little stuff I'm throwing out there. Let me just try. The more you can think of it as little experiments, that you go, okay, I have 20 minutes, I have 30 minutes. Let me just write it and send it and see what happens from there. You can, you know, maybe at first, maybe give yourself an hour, but like I've certainly written pitches in 15 minutes and 30 minutes and 5 minutes. And, so know that it gets easier over time. And the last thing I'll say is, sadly, you're gonna spend this time somewhere. Like, you, I mean, maybe you will be, what's her name that did it, Sally Rooney. Maybe you'll be Sally Rooney, where it doesn't seem like she has to do any marketing of her own. Everybody just wants to read it. Great. I hope you are. Most of us aren't Sally Rooney, physically. So, the rest of everybody has to market their stuff. It's just a fact. And so to me, the more that you accept, like, marketing will be a part of my creative life forever. So, how can I do it in a way that, first, the only aim is I don't hate it? And then as you go along, go, maybe I like it a little bit. Because if you market your stuff and you know how to sell it, then you can self publish, you can do whatever, you can grow an audience. Your stuff will get out there. And if you only are, I just want to write it and let people come, that's cool. You can try that, but that leads to a whole different kind of disappointment, at least in my experience. So that's, it's like, marketing is going to be a part of this. So what kind do I like the most, and how can I devote and it can be 30 minutes. How can I devote 30 minutes or an hour a week to that? Um, that helps me out a little bit.
Yeah, like is there any place that I can find, 40 minutes in my schedule to like work on a pitch?
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be that you pitch everybody and you're pitching a million times a week, especially as you're working on your book doing that. If you regularly pitch once a week, like that's, especially by the time your book is done, like that's a lot of pitches that end up out there. So I think that's the deal too. And again, it's another thing where I get very all or nothing, and I know a lot of my students can be the same. And so I think, well, if I want my book to succeed, then I've got to do everything. Like I've got to be here and here and here and here and do this. And then I go, oh my God, that sounds horrible. I'll do 0% of that. And so one thing I thought of recently is, like, not everything has to be the Wicked press tour. The press tour for Wicked has been huge. I mean, still some people didn't really see it, but I saw Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo everywhere all the time crying. It doesn't always have to be like that. It can also be just anything where you're out there and doing it. And yes, sometimes you'll have a Wicked press tour time, great. But even if it's just a Cillian Murphy press tour who, like, comes out of Ireland begrudgingly every once in a while to talk about a movie, that's okay too, because the word still gets out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I know, and sometimes you see people all the time everywhere because they have like a big publicity firm and all of that, and you're really teaching us to how to fish rather than to buy the fish at the marketplace. You know what I mean? Like you're like,
Yeah.
okay, this is how you go to it and have agency over your process, which ultimately is so much better. I mean,
Yeah.
to know how to do this, to know how to run this wheel and steer this ship is like, it's gold, really. And I think a lot of people feel like it's very difficult to do. But what you're saying is like, no, there's like a formula and you have to find like your beat, but like, then it's okay.
Yeah. And and that's really the key. And I think that's the key thing to remember is it's not even always about the numbers you're getting from it initially, because often the numbers aren't exciting at first. Sometimes they are, but it's like your own creative agency. And so that was that same thing of like, sure, I got to audition for whatever, like Broadway musicals, but that was every once in a while. And when I was writing for Snooki's blog, I like got to write it and get paid and see my name on it right away. And that actually built up more momentum and confidence and skill than just hoping somebody found me. And then I found the same with all kinds of writing, of like when I do submit other things in the future that are bigger, it will be wildly different because I will have that feeling of, boy, I hope this gets picked up, but I know I'll be totally fine if it doesn't because there's always another way.
Yeah, and that's what's nice. Like people are talking about, the full article versus the pitch, and you
Yeah.
don't have to. I mean, in book writing, you really actually should most of the time write your book. I mean, there are people
Yeah.
who say there's these shortcuts and everything, and I've just noticed in my publishing career that it doesn't work that well to try to
Mhm.
like, oh, I'm going to short circuit this and just try to do a proposal, but it does work in short form. You can really pitch an article, and if nobody picks it up, you're like, okay, well, then I'm not writing that article. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Sometimes with essays, you have to write the essay first, like for
Yes.
personal essays, but not even all of those.
No.
And same thing of like, they didn't like that essay. Well, I get to pitch it to this person, or put it up on my blog. Or, it's just like there's just so many more choices and ways you can still be seen for what you do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So somebody's asking, yeah, so Amber is a faculty for the Gateless Academy. So we're doing sort of a meet and greet today. So you guys are meeting her and then you're going to really work with her. And when you work with her, she'll do things like sample pitches. I mean, it's very inclusive what she gives you guys. You'll have all that when you're working with her, and it's really part of understanding the landscape that is the written word. Some people think like, I'm going to work on this one book, I'm not going to write anything else, I'm not going to write personal essays, I'm not going to write for publication, I'm not writing any other books, I don't even read that much, but I know I have this book that wants to go out. And really, what Amber and I are interested in is the written word as a medium of expression that has a lot of different sort of places that it can go. And for Amber, she's like really knows this landscape. And for me, it's been book publishing. And for
mhm.
other people, it's speaking, but that you have to write that speech, the speech writing. But it's sort of like all the things that you can do with a written word. And this is one of them. So, you're going to saturate yourself with this the last month of the academy when you've really learned to build the book and you've learned to sort of do the proposal, and we'll do a lot of work on platform as well in terms of social media, in terms of your website, in terms of networking, in terms of really allowing yourself to be in the conversation. And this is part of that. This is integral to it. So, she's not going to be able to give every single thing today, and we wouldn't want her to feel that like she has to, but just rest assured that when you're in the academy, you're going to get a lot of that, and we're going to have a lot of conversations about it. Because it is, right, Amber, such a big part of being sort of an author and an authority in the world.
Yeah, and it's remembering like why do you want to do this? Reminding yourself of that a lot. And I mean that in all the ways. So I know sometimes people say that and it's like, what's my big why? Well, so my child can see me succeed, or I'm doing it to, they have these like really beautiful, lofty goals. And half the time for me, it's like because I want to have enough money to live and I want people to read my work and like it. It's like, is that cool? Probably not. But there are some times where that's the main point. And I thought about this for another thing I'm working on. It was like, what's my goal? Well, that people would read it and think it's fun. Okay, now instead of this feeling like, oh, this huge daunting thing and I'm not going to be good enough, It's like, oh, I can write something and people think it's fun. Like, cool. Now, so that's the same thing with, hey, I just want another place where people can see this. Okay, I want a name that's very braggable that I can put on my query, or on my sorry, when you're submitting your book. I'm using the wrong word, but and it's okay to have any of those and all of those kind of motivations. Um yeah, I just think your chances increase the more you just give yourself opportunities to put stuff out there. I've just seen that time and again. And again, it doesn't mean you have to do it as a race of then I need to be everywhere all the time right now. It's like, nope, here's the smorgasbord. If it means sometimes you're just on the social media, macaroni and cheese, cool. If other days you're over at the salad bar of Substack, delightful. And other days you're going to put a little bit of everything on your plate and love it. So it's thinking of it like that to me makes it a little more sustainable
Yeah.
and more exciting to work on.
More exciting. Yeah. And I remember, when sort of the rumpus started, the cut, it kind of, they all sort of started around the same time within, Slate. And
Yeah.
I was reading all of them, right? It was
Mm.
like, oh my gosh, I couldn't, I was like so amazed that I could just click. I didn't have to get these literary magazines in the mail. This kind of
Yeah.
dates me. And I remember being at retreats and, I remember one time Terry wrote something about games. And I was like, oh, I can't remember who it was. I think it was BuzzFeed or Bustle or something was having a
Mm.
oh no, the Baltimore Review actually was having a contest on games. And I was like, why don't you send that right now to the Baltimore Review? And she won the contest. And it's just like we don't realize that these things can happen. I mean, she wrote that piece in 20 minutes, and then Kelly was I think she actually might have been at the same retreat, but she was writing something and I had just read The Rumpus and I was like, you should pitch that editor. He just did something sort of adjacent to that. And she did, and she got in, and that really like set her course for
Yeah.
being able to pitch again. So I
Yeah.
think what's great about the work you're doing, Amber, and it's very gateless, is that this is possible. It's not
Yes.
like getting your name on the marquee, right? Which is just like it could maybe might never happen. Like if you're a good writer, if you follow these guidelines, particularly if you're working with Amber as you will in the academy, can happen and you can actually start to have a voice. And I think in this day and age, one thing that we're doing is like posting comments on each other's like in talking, texting to each other about these things, but like you have something to say and you could actually say it to more people than just your friends. And that's what's so incredible. So even if you're not writing about your book, even if you're not taking a story from there, but you just have something that you're really passionate about, like birds or like I'm obsessed with adaptations. And it really is when I started to talk to Natalie and Amber that like oh, I can write about adaptations and I don't have to just like bore my friends or whatever.
Yeah. I'm sure your friends aren't bored, but yeah, it's like you can reach your friends and a whole bunch of other people. And it just all helps. So don't worry if yeah, you did write about birds a bunch of times. Uh, they're not, oh, the bird lady wants to like write about this now. Like that's not going to happen unless you just were so wildly successful writing about birds that they're like, please come write a book about birds. And that's a different problem, and perhaps not a problem at all to have. So, also
Right.
that kind of like pigeonholing just doesn't happen as much with freelance. Like you have to just be wildly successful. If you're worried about being pigeonholed, it meant you were insanely successful in one area. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you can do that. Just like try to like Natalie did at the beginning of when she was working with you, where she just like really went for the same thing and then she
Yeah.
started to branch out once yeah.
Yeah, and with niche or no niche, it's really up to you. So if it's easier for you to stay in your niche because you're already thinking about that, you've got a lot of ideas about that, it's what your book is about, that's totally fine to just stay in that niche. If you tend to have ideas that are a little broader or you just have a one-off idea or whatever, it's absolutely fine to do that too. I found through for me, I was kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall, but by doing that, I ended up with some different niches I never would have had if I hadn't tried. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong with this. I mean, as you're publicizing your book, like yeah, maybe make sure some of them are more in line with what the book is about, but I don't find if you try to make yourself do a niche that you don't want to, that's not going to be helpful. If you try to make
Hmm.
yourself pitch everything and that's not what you want to do, that's not going to be helpful. So you really get to feel it out for yourself, and it can change over time as you work with more people.
Yeah, yeah, that's such a good point. And for those of you who are working on your books, and Amber, you can come in on this too, but you don't want to give your book away. Like some people think that they write like a summary of their book into a short condensed article that then they're going to get published because people have seen that summary. But I think what works a little bit better for books, sometimes if you write the summary and it goes viral, people will be like, well, everybody already knows the book. So it's sort of like pulling out just a little tiny piece of the book that you can blow up into an article rather than the whole thing. Because
Yeah.
I remember Kathleen Moran, her story of what happened to her. She did eventually publish her book, was so popular. I mean, it just went wild. It was like we put it on Salon, and then
Mhm.
it was like the top 5 essays on Salon that year, and then it was like on NPR, and it went into the Atlantic, and it just like sort of blew up, and we had a problem publishing it because
Mm.
people were like, well, I already saw that story and I feel like the public really knows it. Whereas maybe if she'd published a smaller piece of it. She really wanted to publish the whole thing, like the whole
Mhm.
summary. But, she was sort of resistant in some ways to like
Mm.
pulling out these smaller pieces. But if we can get past the resistance of that, it's like if you're writing about how your husband was killed in a terrorist attack, what if you went back and wrote about grief and the wardrobe, like what I did with
Mhm.
my husband's clothes, like that sort of thing. Like, were you picking this little muscle? Amber, can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I think um that is generally such the better way to go and is usually easier to pitch because yes, there are stories that are just the big headline of, my husband cheated on me with 400 women and now I blah 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 live in a monastery or whatever. And those are fine too. There's nothing wrong with that if you got that story. But yeah, I would say that's not a real one. uh, I
Okay, we
mean,
can
who
steal
knows?
that because it
It
hasn't
might
been
be.
used.
Might be, but anyway. So those snippets, I think I just that is the way to do it because when you do that, when you think of a summary, that's what it's going to feel like, a summary, and a summary is never as evocative. I mean, that's a reason why we can read a summary of something and still want to read the book, right? Because there's all these details and stuff we're missing. But at the same time, with movie trailers nowadays, like half of them give so much away that you're like, I don't even want to see it. I feel like I know everything, even though they're missing like what's actually beautiful about it. So that idea of pulling tiny pieces is what are the tiny stories, and now I'm sure she had a publicist and everything for this, but the example I think of is Jeanette McCurdy had the Cut, I believe, or part of New York Magazine. She had an excerpt, but it still was like a not a full excerpt of her book. I'm glad my mom died, but it was just one story. It was like one story of her as an adult going to visit a boyfriend and how her mom freaked out about it. And it ended with her mom calling her these horrible names and ending the email with, also send $800, the refrigerator's broken. And so it gave us this very clear idea. It was a very interesting little story, but it didn't tell us anything about like eating disorder or addiction or how that came. There's still tons we didn't know, but I just remember personally reading that and being like, well, this is for sure going on my TBR now because it was just good example of tone and character and voice, and it was interesting in and of itself, but it wasn't, you just felt like of course you could read more of this. So yeah, it's yeah, and it can be hard, but just pulling those threads. And I think a good thing to think of is like if you feel like the story is too small, or it's like, oh, this is too niche, this is too small, that's probably the right size for
Yeah.
these kind of publications.
Yeah, and another thing that writers ask a lot, Amber, or we talk about a lot is like, what stories do I use in my book versus what stories am I working on for articles? And I love your second, of those three pieces, your second one, why do readers care now? Because I feel like when we write for publication, there has to be a global frame that's relevant. It has to be in the zeitgeist right now. In some ways, it's important.
Yeah.
It's like,
Hmm.
why am I writing about grief? Well, it's the holidays, and grief is tough at the holidays. You know what I mean? Like you can kind of like move
Hmm.
into the global frame that's contemporary.
Yeah, and this is like a very morbid example, but it's a thing you'll see a lot and it helps a lot of personal essays is like as things come up in public consciousness, pop culture, whatever, those can be good hooks for your stories. So, like a couple of years ago, whatever, when Britney Spears had a miscarriage that was very public, then I saw there was a number of people's stories about their own miscarriages, and they had nothing to do with Britney Spears. They were different scenarios, but they just used, oh, this is a public example of a thing that people tend to not talk about. So we opened a window for talking about this. And that's how you can sometimes guide your essays into them. Like they don't all have to be morbid like that, but it was from a few years ago, but it was about a man and his relationship with his father, but it was around the movie Space Jam, the kind of little crux of it. And so when the Space Jam 2 came out, that was an opportunity to pitch that. So just looking for these, hey, these things are kind of mirroring stories that I have. You don't have to then rewrite it and talk about how Britney Spears is involved, but just going, hey, it's just kind of that we're talking about this now. People are paying attention. Here's another asset of this that I think people should pay attention to on this topic and pitch your story that way.
So, Amber, we have 3 minutes left. So, if
Yeah.
you guys want to get busy in the chat, you can. But I have a question while the chat is quiet. Um, what was your first like big hit? Like a hit that you were like, okay, I've arrived. Like this is what I wanted always. Or
Um, I guess my biggest hit, well, I guess the twofold one is I did write, I mean, now I wouldn't write about weight loss, but I was writing about weight loss for Greatest, but if from very like not glamorous terms. And that got to be pretty popular and that was cool. So I got to have a column about that and interact with a lot of
yeah.
people. And that was really cool. And then just like when my first uh and I did my first webinar and like people signed up for stuff, that was also so huge because it was like, oh, that's right. I'm not bad at this. And oh, this is a way it gets to impact people in a different way. And it was just a very special feeling of like, oh, all of this just random assortment of weirdness that my life has been feels like it fit together suddenly. Um, and was very cool. So
That
those
is
are
really,
two bigger ones.
yeah, those are like two moments in your life. Yeah. And yeah, I think it's really helpful to know that you built from nothing, really.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I had my background was in theater and improv. I had a degree in theater. I was 31 when I started. I didn't have anything published. I'd just written sketch comedy in
yeah,
pilots nobody saw. So that's where I was starting from. Um, don't have an MFA, don't have a PhD, you know. And then yeah,
yeah,
got to eventually write for the New York Times. Like,
yeah. It's
holy
amazing.
hell.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's incredible. And yeah, Amber has a membership program which you guys can see from her amberpetty.com, which I sent out to you all, especially people in the academy. You'll get to know her work and you'll get to know when you're an author how exactly do you sort of pitch? We'll talk about that a lot before you even work with Amber, just like how do you build that platform? How do you pitch? And I think what's really important about coming at it from all angles is this understanding of yourself as a writer who can talk about your subject from all. So you could do a personal essay, but you could also do a how-to, but you can, like you could also do a listicle. Like there are so many ways that you can do it. It's a really creative medium.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And
Yeah.
then Megan's question, really quick, because I think this is, she has very, very limited time and gets worried that she won't have time for a turnaround. So the turnaround for stories is usually a week to 2 weeks. If it's shorter than that, the editor will also understand if you say no. So you almost never get immediate turnaround unless it is a news flash kind of related thing. So you'll always have 1 or 2 weeks. And you can always ask for a little more time. So if you get 1 week, the editor says, you can just immediately say, could I actually do 2 weeks? And almost always they don't care. So there's some flexibility on those deadlines, always. If you truly don't have any time, yeah, okay, don't pitch right now. But it's also different. It's always different when somebody's saying, hey, I'm an editor, I'm paying you, and it's going to be seen. Somehow, when that happens to me, oh my God, look at this time that appeared. It's just much easier to make the time for it when you know something's happening with it. So, if you, and let's estimate like 4 hours ish. So, an article can take 1 hour, it can take 8, it could take more, but let's say roughly like 4-ish hours to get a huge chunk of it done over the course of a week or 2 weeks. If you feel like you could fit that in without, losing it, then you have time to pitch. If you truly don't have that time at the moment, just wait a little bit, pitch, and remember that people don't always get back to you right away. So you might pitch and then 2 weeks later hear back or whatever. So just keeping that in mind for yourself for the timelines.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really helpful. And it's really helpful because, we often think what the editor says goes, it's concretized. There's no way you can like move around that. And really you can kind of, they're a person too, they understand.
And
Yeah.
editors, okay. I've only dealt with acting entertainment agents and stuff like that in the past, and they are usually not friendly or fun in my experience. Anyway, they can be bad. So agents sometimes can be a little scary. I think lots
Yeah.
of literary agents aren't. Editors are not like that. Editors are very rarely jerks. They are writers like you. They want to get you the best deal they can. They just need to know things so that they can make their schedule happen, So that's it. So asking stuff from editors is okay. If you need to ask a question, you need to ask for longer time as long as you do it before the day it's due. That often they don't care about. They just, as long as the communication is open and they get your thing on the date you settled on, you're there's so many people that just ghost editors after getting a story, So
Yeah.
being on time, being communicative is huge, and they are not you're just one little story of their day that they want to come in on time, So
Yeah.
if you're saying, hey, could I turn it in tomorrow? Half the time they're like, couldn't care less. Great. Turn it in tomorrow. As long as I see it, we're good.
And then one last thing, Amber, and this is a question that I get a lot from my writers around sending their books out. But when you send out for publication, how soon is it okay to like circle back and be like, "Hey, I sent you a pitch like last week or 2 weeks ago, or I noticed you're still writing on this. I'm wondering if you saw this, or should you do that?"
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, you should definitely follow up. For check the submission information. Sometimes they'll tell you exactly what to do or not to follow up or whatever. If it's modern love, like you don't need to follow up. It's going to take them however many months and that's it. Nothing to do there. Most places you can do a follow up within 7 to 10 days. I'd like to give it a week always, unless it is a super timely idea. Like it won't be a story in 3 more days. So 7 to 10 days later, follow up. And the follow up is not convincing them with any new information. The follow up is just to put it back up at the top of their inbox. So I
Hmm.
literally just say, seeing if you're still interested in this, thanks. If a new information comes out, sure, then I would give that of like, oh yeah, I just got a deal for a book about this topic. Or, oh, the news story that came out actually relates to this and blah, blah, blah. But otherwise, I just go, are you interested in this? Click. Well, that's it. Follow up done.
Yeah, yeah. And Charlotte's saying she pitched to what was essentially a slush pile, never heard from the publication. Then 6 months later, she wound up. So it can be that same with book publication, actually.
Mm.
Sometimes, like, writers will be sending out, and they'll be like, huh. And then somebody will circle back that we sent to, like, in the first tier. It's
Hmm.
fascinating how that works. But
Yeah.
anyway, Amber, I don't want to take too much of your time. It's already 5 after, and I just want to say with my whole heart and with everyone on this call, just how generous you are. I love talking to people who really understand their field and what they're doing and are generous enough to like spread that solidity around in terms of like the
Yeah.
depth that you really understand this work. It's just thrilling.
Oh, yay. And that's like there's just actually room for all of you. All of you are good enough to write for publications. It's not a matter of that. It's just a matter of trying and a little bit resilience, which you already have. And it doesn't matter if you've never been published or got published 20 years ago. They're mostly interested in what is the story right now? What are you presenting me with? And they like it or they don't like it, and somebody else will take it, you know? That's all they really care about. So that's why I think it can also be good of when your heart is so much in your book, you can have a little bit of the like no F's given with pitching of like, I've already got my great book, so I'll send these scraps to you. And you'll be lucky enough to get them if you want. It's kind of fun to practice that.
Oh my God, you are just amazing. And for all of you who are in the Academy now and already accepted, we have an incredible call coming up next week, which I'll write to you about. But for this is our last open luminary call before we close it to the public. And Amber, you just delivered in a way that's just unbelievable. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's amazing. So great to see you all. Thank you for coming. And please reach out if you have any questions. And we will send the Gateless Academy applicant, the people who are accepted will send you that G doc. So don't worry, you'll get it. Okay, my loves. Mwah. Bye.